Hello everyone, welcome book lovers to Your Library at Home. I'm Sam Hagan from the State Library's Public Programming team. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet and learn from each other on country. I live and work on Gadigal land and I pay my respects tonight to Gadigal people and elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal Australians who are joining us for this evening's event. Thank you for logging on tonight, which I'm sure is going to be a fantastic conversation. But before we jump in, and I introduce Bri, I'd like to share some exciting news with you. You may have heard it already, but the library will be opening our two main reading rooms on the 1st of June on a limited basis. Obviously, we are working to keep everyone as safe as possible, so it will feel and be a little bit different than normal. But if you would like any further information, please go to the library's website at www.sl.nsw.gov.au, where you will soon be able to find out all the information you need to come and visit us again at the library. We are so excited to be slowly coming out of our social distancing cocoon. So after that exciting news, I am going to throw to Bri so we can start the conversation, and I'll see you at the end for a Q&A. Bri, are you there?
Hello, I am. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to my lounge room and apparently my controversially color-coded bookshelves. Of course, I will second Sam's acknowledgement of country. I'm in Sydney, so also on Gadigal land. And as always, we encourage you, wherever you are, to consider the land where you're joining us from. Of course, you are here tonight to hear from the author of Sand Talk, Tyson Yunkaporta. I loved this book so much. I remember when I first started reading it and I was just inhaling it and I was having such fun whilst my brain felt as though it was a muscle that was stretching and reaching in new ways. And then at about the halfway point, Tyson writes about how we feel positive and why learning new things makes us feel so good. And I'm so thrilled in particular as well that although we can't all be together physically, that in particular this book club is free and available to everyone everywhere. And we have a lot of people joining us tonight, and I'm just so thrilled about that. So to officially welcome him, Tyson Yunkaporta belongs to the Upledge clan from Western Cape York and is a senior lecturer in indigenous knowledges at Deakin University. He has worked extensively with Aboriginal languages and in indigenous education, and his research activities include oral histories of natural disasters, language, health, and cognition. He is a published poet and exhibited artist who practices traditional wood carving as well. Tyson, are you there? Would you join us, please?
Hey!
Wonderful. Good evening.
Hey, how are you doing?
So well. Thank you so much for joining us.
It always takes me a while to find the buttons.
Oh, yeah. No problem at all.
Get that lag.
I would love to jump straight in. I have so many questions I'm excited to ask you about Sand Talk. I thought it might be good to get started with an introduction for people who might not have read the book yet, because with book club we often have a mix. And something I found throughout Sand Talk was a kind of tension that you articulate, where one of the most wonderful things about indigenous knowledge, the way you describe it, is how it is dynamic and responsive and evolving and changing, and how there's a tension there between turning that into a book, which is obviously sort of stuck in time, and using the written word. So I was hoping you could begin by explaining, I suppose, what Sand Talk is and why you decided to put these ideas and this knowledge into a book format.
Yeah, well, it was really tricky to know where to pitch it, you know, and so the publisher that commissioned it, they've got a certain kind of readership, you know. So, you know, while I wanted it to be accessible for as many people as possible, like, for example, I'd love just one person in my family to read it. It would be awesome, but they don't want to read it.
Why don't they want to read it?
Because it's this is too hard, and you know, some get like half a chapter in and like, this is too hard, or but yeah, mostly it's because everybody resents me, you know, burning half my life and my relationships to do it.
Did you find it was more of a taxing process than anything else? Is that what you mean?
No, the writing was okay because I did the actual writing in about 2 weeks, but I'm still paying for that you know, because my home duties had to, you know, so I went on a writing retreat for the first week, so that's why the first half makes sense, and then when writing the second half of the next week, it was just, you know, wiping dirty asses and you know, having people yell at you in the kitchen. It was tricky, you know, little babies.
I do not have the joy nor the stress of it.
A house vaguely clean and you know, pull your weight and then, you know, everyone getting cranky because you're not, you know, because you're writing that effing book, you know, just, I can't wait until it's over. And I'm like, it's over. And then, but I had no idea about how books go. So I didn't know, I wasn't prepared for how much of your life that it eats after you've written it.
After you've written it?
Yeah, because there's these things every other day. Yeah, but I mean, at least now I don't have to fly to Sydney and stay in some crappy motel and try to ignore the minibar, and then, you know, fly back and catch a cold on the plane on the way back, and then you know, all that sort of thing. Yeah, so I'm actually enjoying the lockdown side.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. So you mentioned that so your publisher is Text.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean. They have a very strong, I suppose, reputation for publishing, I think, reliably meaningful books that I would describe that contribute to various national conversations.
Yeah.
Was Sandtalk something that you took to them? How did you did you pitch the idea? Did you know what kind of book you wanted to write?
No, I wrote and I guess this is a way into saying what the book's about. Sorry, my little bubs just walked in.
No worries.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Is that winter time?
No. Go. Yeah. Yeah, so I wrote like a cheeky, you know, I'd always fantasized about like how good it would be to be one of those arts critics, you know, who just goes around and sees things and writes about them, and that's your life. Like,
yeah.
But I always thought that was for really rich people, or I don't know, some kind of person that wasn't even in my world, you know. But then I started having a go at it, and I did a few things. But what I really wanted to do was to put the indigenous lens on non-indigenous art, and to critique that from our point of view.
Well, because it's so much almost always the opposite. We just have a surplus of white critics.
There was this idea that, you know, we need some Aboriginal reviewers, you know, to review the Aboriginal art, because, you know, the white critics are making a mess of it, or whatever. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I'm happy to do that. But when I'm doing that, I'm promoting. I'm not going to say anything bad about my own mob's work, you know. So I'm just promoting it, you know. So I just I had one of those moments, those effort moments, where I went, no, I'm gonna review the Vincent van Gogh exhibition in Melbourne when it was here. I'm going to review that and see if anyone wants to print it.
Yeah.
From a black fellas perspective.
What did you say in the review?
Well, it was called Seasons, and it was about the 4 seasons. And so I did it from our seasonal perspective. And, you know, how in his quest to sort of discover nature, he kind of missed the point. He missed it because of his cultural lens. Because, you know, the view of the landscape is necessarily an economic view, that those 4 seasons are fake. They're a economic cycle of extraction, you know, of industrial extraction. And yeah.
And so you wrote that review
Yeah, so he kind of, the nature that he was looking at wasn't the nature, and he wasn't noticing the seasonal signs. You know, there were just no animals there. You know, if he was looking for trying to connect to the divine through nature, then he probably needed to be looking at badgers and voles and vipers and bloody, you know, foxes and all them kind of things over there, and you know, the willows and the ash and the actual, you know, native trees and what's left of whatever's left of that ecosystem there. But instead, he was looking at fields of wheat. You know, trees planted as windbreaks, and ended up blowing his brains out in the middle of the field. You know? Poor fella. So yeah, so I just yeah, I thought that he'd completely missed the seasonal cycles totally, and yeah, so I looked at it from that point of view, and I just got like buckets of hate mail, emails, and which was I really enjoyed, like, because I was analyzing all those emails, like saying, wow, what's the buttons that really press people off that way?
What made them so, was there anything that repeated through them that was making them angry?
It was mostly just the audacity, which I knew that already. It was just like, how dare you, you know, stay in your lane, Blackie. Like, this is the Dutch Masters. Don't be, you know, don't be jumping over into it.
Yeah.
Stay in your lane. Yeah, so most of it was like that. But Michael from Text Publishing, he read that and he just loved it. And he called me up and said, you know, can you write me a book like that? Yeah, and so, yeah, I hummed and hawed for a long time. And then I just had that idea because it's part of my methodology, you know, as an indigenous researcher, is that I carve everything before I write it. So I carve all the knowledge into a traditional object first, and then I sit with that, and I like just translate fragments of that into English, you know, and that's what I report.
In the book, you kind of, the way it sounded to me was like one of the other reasons why you carve first, is so that almost like the priorities of what you're trying to communicate like stay focused instead of the priority becoming like matching what a written word format requires.
Yeah.
Is that right? Can you explain?
Yeah, it's also to protect my cognition. Just because, I mean, my experience of my culture is that it's a culture of genius. You know, just you capable of the most vast intellectual feats with this kind of embodied cognition that extends out into your relationships and place and time and objects and everything around you. You know, all this sentient, vibrant, living world around. And you know, that's not just you know, will-o'-the-wisp, buddy, skipping through the tulips or whatever. It's a proper, real intellectual connection. You know, and an understanding of systems and being within a system. You're never standing outside of the system looking in. And that's the thing. That's what makes, one of the criticisms of Aboriginal thinking is that it's subjective, you know, because we can never separate ourselves from what we're observing. Which
that was
they can't do that in physics anyway, man. So like, you know,
it was one of my favorite critiques.
So I don't know why.
It's one of my favorite critiques that runs through the whole book. It's one of my questions, is just, I think so much of, you know, this sort of Enlightenment and Western thinking doesn't acknowledge that objectivity is, you know, it might be considered an admirable goal, but it's a philosophical concept. Like, it's not ever actually possible. I love that was all the way through.
Because, I mean, I didn't want to talk about Aboriginal knowledge, you know, because there's plenty of that out there, you know, and this is for this and that's for that. And, you know, then these terrible things happened and then that and that and that. But I just didn't want to do that. Like I had this idea, like, what if I could actually somehow find a way to write that was in the knowledge still? Because, you know, every Indigenous writer necessarily has to step outside of their knowledge system just to write the book. Because you're thinking and writing, and you're writing while you're thinking. And writing messes up your cognition. If you ever look at the studies about how what literacy does to your brain, it rewires it in a way that is so antithetical to the evolutionary sort of machinery of your brain. It's really inefficient, highly abnormal, and potentially brain damaging in a lot of ways. So I mean, I wanted to have it all done in all these objects, and to be able to pick up one of those objects at any time, where I'd sort of uploaded, you know, all of the stories of a couple of decades into those objects, and then just kind of shuffle through them and select what I was going to say. Because that's the other thing about Aboriginal scholarship, is you can't share everything. You know, some things are just for some kinds of people, you know, male, female, young, old, your clan, your moiety, that one, you know. So yeah, so it's just going through, and it was just a matter of typing out the ways to say those things that people could get it. But in a way that it wasn't about the knowledge, though. That was the thing. The idea, the book wasn't supposed to be about Aboriginal knowledge. It was supposed to be about the world, the global system, but looking at it from our knowledge perspective.
It's
and
the
so
lens,
the idea,
not the subject.
That show don't tell thing.
Yeah.
So I'm showing Indigenous knowledge in action as a method of inquiry for, you know, looking at sustainability issues in the world. Because the main difference between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal methods of inquiry, I know that they're represented as being polar opposites, but they're not that different. The main difference is that time and place are variables. Time and place, and you yourself as the observer are in what you're observing. I guess it's those three things. So variables of time and place are included. You're not taking things out of their context and studying them in isolation. You know, everything's contextualized, highly contextualized. So you can see sort of patterns. You can make some pretty solid predictions, you know, and come up with some interesting out-of-the-box solutions, you know, coming at these complex problems from an Aboriginal perspective.
One thing that I found really interesting was your choice of the us to pronoun.
Yeah.
Can you explain to someone who hasn't read the book what that is and why you chose that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are so many pronouns in Aboriginal languages that don't exist in English. And there's some in English that don't exist in our languages too. So, you know, so when people are, you know how people put their pronouns now, you know, she, her, and all that sort of thing. Someone asked me to do that once. And so I said, oh, well, my pronouns are nil and nunum, you know, in language. But everybody's pronouns is that, because we don't have gendered pronouns because they're not necessary. So, you know, everybody's just this it, you know. Yeah.
And what does the us to mean? Because when So
there's that, but so then, I mean, with that, I was just looking at the first person pronouns. With all of them, there's a lot of different ones. So first person pronouns, there's, you know, a few different ways of saying I, you know, depending on who and the kind of I that you're referring to. If you're referring to yourself as the brilliant individual that you are, then you say it one way, and, you know, as a distinct entity. But then there's the, you know, you belonging to them, you know, you belonging to her or whatever. There's a whole heap of different relational ways of saying I. But then in the plural, it gets interesting because there's a lot of different kinds of we. And I believe that your Aboriginal pronoun system is there to show all the social roles that you have to occupy in a sustainable culture, you know. So we do have us, like an all of us kind of one that's close to English we, only kind of more inclusive, you know, very large us. But then there's an exclusive us or we, and that's like, so us but not them. So that's in your exclusive groups, like your gender groups or your age groups or your clan groups, or, you know, things like that, family groups, you know, or, you know, people who are in a book club. That would be an exclusive we. But then there's the one that we almost called the book this title, the us too.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's the pairs, you know.
Right.
And so it's so everything in nature, you know, all these ecosystems, they talk about, you know, them being vast and interconnected, but you know, at their base, they're in pairs. So everything belongs to a pair, not just one pair, but many pairs, you know. So you're paired, so ants are paired with yabbies, you know, totemically, you know, culturally, but then also in the ecosystem, they perform the same function. One's on the riverbank and one's in the river, you know. And they have this relation, and there's all these symbiotic relations that come out, you know, between every animal, every plant, every phenomenon, every wind, every entity, you know, in the landscape. It's paired with many.
A lot of the
so all those pairs
symbols
together.
had pairs.
Yeah, all those pairs network together and connect with other pairs, and then they form those inclusive groups, you know, that work really well, you know, within their group, but only for as long as they're interacting with other groups in the same way and pairing with other groups. And then your big we, that big group, you know, has to be a complex dynamic system where there's constant movement and exchange between many dissimilar, you know, things in there. And then that has to interact with another system as well, otherwise it will stagnate. And so it's a real model for sustainability just in our grammar. And the idea of us two, you know, I've never heard of a novel being written in the dual first person before. So we nearly named the book that, because I'm talking to you, you know, when I'm writing it. And the intention, like I only ever thought it'd sell 1,000, maybe 2,000 copies. So I thought I'd be able to manage all these relationships that I've created, but I can't manage them now.
A maximum of 2,000 us twos.
Yeah,
but it's now exploded.
Like 10,000. It's 10 times more than we thought. You know.
That's wonderful.
It's
that makes me really happy to hear
15, approaching 20,000 in Australia, I think, sold, and they've launched in the US now. So you know, that's a much bigger market. I mean, they've got more people who've recently lost their jobs in the States than we've got people in Australia. So I can't get my head around that many people. But I am glad I don't have to fly there for the launch anymore, because I was very terrified that I wouldn't be able to come. Like I'd get stuck there as it all just sort of collapses on the bloody Caligula/Nero emperor that's in charge of the joint now. It's
yes. Yeah. One of the things, speaking of Caligula and Nero, one of the ideas that I was so, I suppose, drawn to and kind of curious about and also heartened by, that I felt like wove in and out of a lot of the different chapters, was that there are alternatives to such hierarchical ways of doing things. And that manifests in all kinds of different ways. Like it comes down to, it's really, really big things, as well as quite simple things, like you described the shape of a yarning circle. And like you just mentioned, the pronouns, and having a better like selection of pronouns to choose from, like, and people, and fighting against this narcissism that you mentioned quite a lot throughout the book, and fighting against just this idea of specialness, and some people having special knowledge, and those people being better than other people, and bosses, and the bosses having bosses. And I just wonder, like, do you have any kind of hope that sort of Western and post-Enlightenment culture will ever be able to get free even a little bit of just how hierarchical everything is?
It's a tricky one, because there's not really a historical precedent for that. You know, for the disease of civilization being completely eradicated. It's a really funny little worm that's in everybody's heads, and I wonder if it can come out. It's you know, everything changed when people did get that I'm special thing going on, and they wanted to elevate themselves. You know, they realized that, you know, if you could get control of the present, then you could rewrite the past. You could control the past and make that narrative whatever you wanted, and that would keep you in control in the present, and also allow you to steer the future. And I think so it was just that power dynamic, I think, that shifted everything into this linear view of time. So because we've never had that before. And then that idea of not being something that's energetically cycling through systems and different parts of systems, you know, eternally, that suddenly being torn from that and being on this linear path was, oh my God, I'm going to die, and then that's it. And then, but, you know, and if you accept a really miserable life and do what you're told, and if you suffer along and you be a good slave, then at the end of it, you get to go to some paradise, you know. And that's when this disease of hope was born. You know, hope, people talk about it as a positive thing. I don't think it is. I think hope is something that's been sold to us. It's a way of relying on a future set of circumstances over which you have no agency. This, you know, trust daddy, it's all going to work out. He knows what he's doing. Well, he don't know what he's doing, you know. And I'm just not going to put my faith in that. And I'm not going to just hope that things are going to turn out all right. I'm going to do what I can do.
Sometimes I feel like it's a way of controlling and almost corrupting a wonderful human, a human desire to try.
Yeah.
To try and improve your situation and the situation of your family or your community, to work hard to make a better life for each other. And that very potentially wonderful drive is just sort of gets like,
yeah, but even that, you know what, that's part of it. And what in nature needs to improve itself? You know, like what species of anything needs to strive to improve itself? Like, yes, it needs to adapt to changing circumstances. It needs to mutate and change and move with the land and you know, changes in the system. But that's all it has to do. You know, if you were living in absolutely perfect circumstances in paradise, in complete harmony with your environment, where you're part of that environment and it's giving you everything that you need forever, what would you need to improve about yourself?
Well, let's talk about this, because there's a section in the book where you critique what we now think of as the absolute given of a working day and a working week. And the sort of vibe I get from that section is you just calling bullshit, that this is, you know, a construct that comes from very identifiable parts of modern history. Yeah,
it's just, I mean, everything's driving, you know, it's like we burn the first, you know, 12 years of our lives after age 5 or whatever, you know, so we're burning our lives up until age 18 on something that is purely, like, the clearly stated exit outcome of it is jobs. And of every policy issue, whether it's environmental or not, it all comes down to, oh no, but we need jobs, you know. So, well, if we cut down this forest, that's it. And it's like, yeah, but we need those jobs. What about the jobs for the people who are cutting it? And no one ever thinks, well, hang on, what are these jobs giving us? You know, so jobs give you shelter, they give you food, they give you the opportunity to
do other jobs,
to develop, well, to craft objects exceptional quality, you know, to make relationships, to produce and transmit and store knowledge. That jobs, you know, are supposed to enable you to do all these things, but above all, to remain fed and sheltered and look after your family. That's what a job is for. But the land already does that. That's what the land does. And when they took the land from us, and when I mean us, I mean humans, because every single one of us is a refugee from a land base, from a habitat that we should be living in. You know, when they took the land from us and they carved it up into little squares and turned it into capital, and we could no longer have access to it, and then they destroyed it as well. It's the people holding the land had to provide these things for us, and we have to do these jobs. So we think that the job is the thing that's providing us with something. It's not. You know, why? Most of it is make work anyway. You know this. It's just, I think people realized that in the first month of lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
I know
wondering
school
how.
kids
Yeah.
did. School
Yeah.
kids was like they were getting all their schoolwork done in an hour and a half for the day and knocking off.
Mm.
So then they've had to readjust that and go, okay, well, you can't work through at your own pace. You have to sit in front of the screen, and I have to have my eyeballs on you, and you have to wait for the next bit before I feed it to you, because we've got to stretch this thing out.
Mm.
Because, God forbid, I mean, we sleep for a third of our life.
Mm.
And then another third, it's mostly life maintenance tasks. And then we're supposed to work for the other third. Because God forbid, I mean, what would happen if we were like, we had all this time on our hands and we were all well and happy and vibrant and awake and we had time.
But then we would have time to organize. And from a
Yeah,
governmental
exactly.
perspective, that's just terrifying.
We'd be organizing. And it's, yeah, you can't have that. It's a very specific model that's been developed, particularly education. It has been developed to pretty much lobotomize human beings, domesticate.
Can you explain the idea for people who haven't read the book? This, like, you talk about the development of the current education system being so top down from the government and being deliberately designed to extend adolescence.
Yeah.
And why the governments benefit from that very sort of empire-driven, standardized approach to education.
Well, it came out of Prussia, and Prussia formed out of, back in the day during the Crusades, the Teutonic Knights went on crusades, and they were just from one small region in Germany. And look, the entire world wasn't big nations back then. It was these, little regions, regional areas, that weren't really states per se. They were still defined. The boundaries were still defined roughly by bioregion, and the languages that were spoken, there was a different language or dialect in every single region, pretty much like the Aboriginal map of Australia. The whole world was like that up until, like, how long ago do you think it was? 5,000 years? Like 100 years ago. It was a bit more than 100 years ago, but not much over a century ago. It was still like that, the whole world. But then, so then these Teutonic Knights formed the state of Prussia. They killed all the indigenous people there, and they took over, and they built up quite a big population there that was bigger than the resources that were available. And they saw something in a failed civilization in the Middle East. They wanted to try out this system of total authority and centralized governance that controlled the daily lived reality of every single person. In that, well, they only had city-states back then. But so they formed this kind of nation of Prussia that had no resources, but what it did have was total social control. So they could force the entire population into a massive, from the population, they could force a lot of people into a massive standing army. And it was the first time in history that a country had or a people had a permanent standing army, because they had that control, And then Napoleon defeated them, and they were really pissed off because, right at the end, they said, charge to your certain deaths kind of thing. And the Prussians just went, no, stuff that, and they ran away. So then they were really angry because they thought they might have been able to win. And they said, well, we need the kind of obedience that will override the fear of death itself, that you will do what you're told, even if it means it's going to kill you. And so they decided they looked into animal husbandry techniques, breaking horses, domesticating wild animals. How you take a wild animal and turn it into a domesticated animal. And they had that technique of separating them from the parents in the daylight hours, confining them in an enclosed space with no access to natural habitat, and giving them purposeless tasks to perform. Sit, stay, run in a circle, whatever, enforced by rewards and punishments. So that's how you break a wild animal. And so they decided they would do that to the population. So they had to create these institutions to take children away in the daylight hours and do that to them. And they found this miracle occurred that was when adolescence was invented, which psychologists still treat like it's a natural condition. It's not. You know, adolescence lasts a few months.
Yeah, can you talk about the contrast there, maybe to explain to people?
Well, we have rites of passage
Yeah.
that shock you out of childhood and into adulthood. You know, and that shock is, you know, like we can't go into the details of it, obviously, because it's secret business, but that shock universally all around the planet, right up to very recently, that shock was, it gave you one lesson, and that lesson was you're not special. I gave you some other lessons, like you're going to die and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's like you're not special was the lesson.
In contrast, I feel like the majority of my schooling was being told every other day that I'm special.
Yeah, and we still are. And now your job is probably to tell people they're special.
You're special, Tyson, no.
Like self-help books, like to realize their inner specialness or whatever, because, and it's the same, you know, like, so, you know, I hate education. I've hated education since I was 5 years old, but I'm 47 now and I'm still in it. I've been trapped in the bloody thing forever. I was a teacher, you know, and then I was an education consultant, and now I'm in academia, and it just goes forever. I just hate it. I hate education so much. Like I think it's cruel, and it's quite deliberately just lobotomizing people. You know, like quite purposely. It's a very highly structured activity that's designed to just completely domesticate us in the same way that you domesticate a pig. If you look at the difference between a wild boar and a pig, you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, that feedlot pig is just this fat, pink, stupid thing, you know, that does what it's told. That wild boar is a little different. But it doesn't take long for a domesticated pig to revert. Once you let them go, it's like a couple of generations, they're very different again, you know. So something I propose in the book is I wonder what humans would look like outside of captivity, you know, because I know we're more than this.
Sorry. In the book, you mentioned a couple of examples of what I can imagine are representative of many more occasions where, particularly by the academy, like by academia and these sort of very hierarchical education systems, you get the feeling that you've been brought in to just sort of like perform tidbits of culture, but that there is never an actual intention to engage with indigenous thinking or have anything at all be remotely challenged.
Yeah. Well, it's the content, you know, they're always looking for the content, the artifacts, the performances. Like, can you just do something? Or, you know, like I show up and they always look disappointed because I think they expected that I might be a bit darker or something, you know. And then, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, indigenous methods of inquiry, and their eyes glaze over and they're like, got a didgeridoo here. How to play the didgeridoo? I'm like, oh yeah, I know how to, but I don't really want to. No, go on, play the. And then it's like, then it's all smiles. Oh, I've played the didge for him. I'm a useless didge player. But it's like, oh my God, it's just shame. It's just this endless, you know, we just have to keep performing this exotica, this authentic kind of, well, this is what it was like, you know, 200 years ago. And then that's what that is. And, you know, but no, it's, you know, like I said, Aboriginal knowledge isn't just knowledge frozen in time from 200 years ago about the land and bush tucker and bush medicine and, you know, boomerangs and stuff. You know, it's a method of inquiry. It's a method of knowledge production, knowledge transmission, and knowledge storage that is, it's wonderful. It makes you a being that adapts to its environment very well when you're following the basic principles of indigenous knowledge, and no matter what that environment is. And so, yeah, you're going to look different, and, you know, the things you make are going to be made out of different materials, and you might be painting with watercolors or whatever instead of ochres, but yeah, it's the same one still. but you know, that's not what people want to see. But that, I guess that's that's the veil that I wanted to lift back for a minute. You know, and that's a hard thing to do in institutions that have basically been dedicated to closing that veil forever. Because that Prussian model, you know, they were once they had success with the education system, they kicked France's ass. You know, the Franco-Prussian War, and then everybody wanted to know their secret.
Yeah, I didn't let you finish that story, that they ended up nailing it and basically exporting that system to the rest of the world. They exported it to everything, along with the science of eugenics, because they were all about ethnic cleansing. You know, gypsies, homosexuals, Jews, bloody anybody, let's get rid of them. You know, disabled people, they're all about that. And regimenting everything and complete control and universal, what was it? Uniformity, national uniformity in thought, word, and deed. So that was the time when everything happened then really fast. So you had the unification of Germany, unification of Italy. Remember that when you did that in year 8 history? And you just went, oh, the unification of Prussia. And the unification of, okay, all these things, they finally unified. Isn't that great? But they unified it through these things, through central banking, centralized education, you know, adopting the military formula, military models of Prussia. So Germany modified that. Prussia unified with Germany, and that ended up becoming one thing, you know. And so all these great nations, you didn't have just kingdoms and city-states and tribes and regions and plurinational groups of regions that were kind of syndicated together in a way that they'd call anarchy now, to be called anarcho-syndicalism, which sounds bloody great to me. It's what we've always done. That's what human beings operate under. And so off it went. So, and that was just, you know, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That was exported everywhere, all around the globe, alongside eugenics, because that was the thing. Those white knights, those old Teutonic knights, they were committed to wiping out the pagan peoples of the world, and that doctrine continued through. And they wiped them all out in Europe. Nobody talks much about those genocides, you know, but you just see the white knight slaying the dragon or the beast, and that's code, you know, and that so this doctrine of eugenics, it built up, and you know, as you know, it went everywhere. And then you had weirdos like that. If you don't know who Madame Blavatsky was, you probably need to look it up. She's shaped the world that we're living in ways that you can't imagine. So both Gandhi and Hitler were devotees of Madame Blavatsky and her writing. So the idea of the Aryan race coming out of India and into Europe, that came from her, this mythical Aryan race, and the idea of the inferior race of Semitic people. You know, that sounds like.
And Gandhi was right into it. He loved it. You know, be the change you want to see in the world. Yeah, good on you, Gandhi. You know, that sounds like that hope thing again to me. Don't bloody tell my kids to be the change they want to see in the world. Bloody make the change you want to see in the world, son. Get out there.
I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question for Tyson, I have one more question for him, and then we do have 10 minutes for audience question and answer. And for anyone watching from home, there should be a little box that says Q&A, and we have 5 questions so far, but please add any more that have come up for you. The final thing I wanted to ask you, Tyson, despite my list of questions barely even being touched upon, because this has just been such a great chat, is I suppose I just wanted to hear from you if there were any really particularly wonderful moments for you when you were writing this book, because the impression I get as a reader is that you spoke to so many different people from so many different places. And I really got a sense through reading the book that I was sort of traveling with you and learning all of these things with you. And I was wondering if any in particular had stood out for you.
When I was writing it, or when it was just kind of percolating over a couple of decades? Or...
Either.
Okay. Either. Yeah. Well, there was nothing like amazing that happened during the actual writing process.
Well, not if it lasted 2 weeks.
That was just, you know, really highly stressful. And but I don't know. I mean, I like getting getting smashed by a ghost in the shower, and in that
Yeah. We haven't even
that
talked
writer's
about that.
retreat and that heritage site in the Blue Mountains, Eleanor Dark's cottage there. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty full on. And I don't know, I find things like that more interesting than the wonderful things. That was kind of exciting and terrifying, and it makes a good story, I suppose.
You said that Varuna had a smoking ceremony after you left there, so
Yeah,
anyone who's going there now should be fine.
Yeah, they've got elders in to have smoking ceremonies and stuff, and it's deadly. Yeah. Yeah, Varuna was really good. They were really understanding, like, you know, this half-naked black fella comes running out into the kitchen covered in blood. And they were very calm. It was awesome. Yeah, I got smashed on the head by this ghost because I was staying in the maid's room, and, you know, so there's quite famously a ghost there that's quite, he's a bit rapey, that ghost. You know, you get a lot of stories, and the women there were experiencing some very uncomfortable moments with, you know, phantom groping and stuff as it happens. But I was staying in the maid's room, so, you know, he kept coming in at night expecting to find the maid.
And got a shock. That's what you wrote in the book, wasn't it?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so even while it's happening, and I'm just almost soiling myself, I'm still laughing, you know, while it's going on, because it's just, I kept thinking of the wolf in Shrek, when Prince Charming.
In the grandma's clothing.
Yeah. Prince Charming pulls back the sheets and he's like, "What?" And that kept popping into my head, so I kept laughing, and that just kept making him crankier, and yeah. And anyway, I went to have a shower and he smashed me over the head, and I had to get stitches.
Which we can laugh about now because you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was laughing then. It was more horrifying at the hospital, but that's another story. Yeah, I don't know. It was a bit more exciting. I mean, when Juma first, so the book is just a vehicle for Juma's symbols, which he believes is going to actually bring the seven spirit families together here. And that's all of us. That's the seven bloods that have gone out from Australia all around the world and are now back. He's really excited about this time in history because they're all back in one place. And so the stories around that, about, you know, when he first gave me those symbols, I had a headache for like 2 months. And I think, and people are telling me similar stories when they read the book. People are saying things like, it's changed me at the molecular level. And I'm like, yeah, that wasn't the book. Like, they keep trying to quote it and try and find what were the bits that changed me. It's like, there's nothing written in there that's changed you. It's those images, you know, looking at and understanding and thinking through those images. And even if you draw them yourself, you know, it's even more powerful. It changes you. It changes you completely. People are writing me letters and saying, you know, my partner says I smell different now.
Wow.
You know, so people are experiencing very extreme changes in themselves. And yeah, that's the magic of his work, the old fella. So really the book was just a vehicle for that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And there's some great stories around that. But we're running out of time because you asked me about Prussia. And no one
I know. No, but I knew you would get into Prussia. I could tell when I was reading it. I was like, this guy wants to talk about Prussia.
That nearly didn't make it in the book.
Oh, well, I'm glad it did.
Yeah.
Sam, are you there? And do we have any particularly good questions from the audience? Because if not, you know, I have a million more.
Hello, no, I am here, and we do have some questions. We've got quite a few, actually.
Sweet.
So if you're happy, Tyson, I might just jump in. There's a couple of themes. So if people forgive me, I might kind of bring a couple together. We've got a couple about education. One, and I'll ask them both, and I'm just reading verbatim here. How do you handle the dynamic, Tyson, between disagreeing with the systemic education system and being part of it for so long? And the next bit of that is, and how do you think young Aboriginal kids can escape the education job cycle?
Yeah, it's the same answer I give for, you know, how can we avoid climate change? You can't. You have to go through it at this stage, and it's the same. You know, as this civilization's in its death throes, we do have to do these things. You know, we have to go into the mines, we have to go into their armies, we have to go into their schools. And we have to do those things because that's the only way you're going to get your food, bros. You know, so I mean, you know, all this positive thinking, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, follow your dream. It's so funny, all this, you know, always having to sell this idea of people following their dreams. What's your dream? What's your passion? You know, my dream is the same today as it was when I was a kid, and that's just, I don't want to die on the side of the road in the rain. You know, you know, one day I have this impossible dream. One day I'm going to own some kind of shelter, like a shed, whatever, somewhere where they're not going to kick me out of. And I know I'll be able to die in that without the rain on my face. That'd be deadly. That's my lifelong dream. And I'm so far away from achieving it. And, you know, I don't know. So what? I'm going to get superannuation and buy a house or something one day. That monopoly money that we're never going to see. And if we do, it's going to be like, here's $250,000. See what you can do with that. Oh, I maybe buy a loaf of bread with it by then. You know, little thing called inflation going on. So what are people are making voluntary contributions to this bloody thing? I mean, can you not project forward a little bit? Anyway, yeah, we just got to go through it. That's my advice. You have to go through it and you have to survive it. And you have to find as many tricks as you can. You know, if you have to write a book, you know, find a way to preserve your genius and the cognition that you have as a human being. And, you know, twist that narrative a bit, twist the genre a bit. Find a new way of writing where you get to preserve your way of thinking. The same way that you're going to have to try and find a new way of being while you're marching in lines and getting shot at in the army. You're going to have to find ways to survive and hold on to your humanity. Jokes, I think, mostly.
Thank you.
Is the only way to deal with that. It's just, that's why there's a lot of funny in the book.
It is funny.
Because you got to laugh.
It was hilarious. Yeah.
You got to laugh because, it's just going to be a really shitty apocalypse if we got no jokes, you know? So we could at least have a good laugh.
So the next question here is, starts with, thank you so much, Tyson. Reading the book was a profound experience and thank you for writing it. I'm one of those who feels changed. My question to you is our version of education entirely the reason we are pigs, not wild boars? Or do you think that urban living has something to do with it? Or can people in urban conditions ever manage to overcome the driving motivation of their own specialness?
It's all the institutions. So you go to any country in the world, you're going to see the same institutions. You know, you go to somewhere that, you know, is barely begun developing, as it were, and you'll find those institutions there. You know, their banks, their schools, their hospitals, their, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's all of those institutions that, you know, ultimately disempower us, dumb us down, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I mean, we haven't had much say in that, human beings. And I don't know, they're calling this entire mess in the world right now the Anthropocene, like it's our fault, like we did it, like it was somehow in our nature, you know, to act like feedlot pigs. That's not our nature. You know, we weren't supposed to be behaving like that. Everything inside us is rebelling against living like this, you know. And in the end, it's like, okay, so like, you know, water shortages are our fault, you know, because of all our selfish bathing, you know. But the fact is, you know, our communities, human communities, only use 10% of that water. The other 90% is used by industry. It's wasted in these horrendously complicated supply chains that are subsidized at every step, losing money, clunky as hell, because it's just a way of moving capital around for some prick. So it costs probably $1 million for you to get one apple come to your table, you know, in the end, and you pay 50 cents for it, you know. That's not us doing that. It's not us burning all that coal. You know, the power that we use is only a small fraction of the power that's used by these ridiculously complicated industries. and this industrial complex. You know, we're not doing this. We didn't do this. It's not the Anthropocene. It's the Arsolocene. There's like a handful of narcissists.
That would be nice if the coming doom only destroyed them.
It sounds a bit like the Holocene, but no, it's the Arsolocene. You know. Yeah, it's not your fault. That's the other thing. You know, you're already terrified. Don't add guilt to it. You didn't do it, and you're not doing it. It doesn't really matter if you recycle or not. In fact, if you stop recycling, you're probably going to stop a lot of toxic waste going. It's a very water intensive, very energy intensive, highly toxic process, recycling, and we should probably all stop doing it. Yeah, probably stop making the mess in the first place. But then once again, that's not us doing it. We're not allowed to eat local fucking produce. We have to eat stuff from the other side of the world that's value added 40 billion times in ways that we can't even understand. Best thing about this virus is the disruption to those supply chains. Yeah.
We've got, because we are in a construct and we are going to run out of time. Sorry.
Sorry.
I personally feel guilty about that. This final question, Tyson, is how would you like to see contemporary culture change to embrace Indigenous people more in literature, film, theatre, etc., etc., etc.?
I don't know. I've got a funny... I believe that inclusion is one of the signs of the apocalypse. Okay, there's two signs of the end of a civilization. If you track all the civilizations in their decline throughout history of civilizations, the last 12, 13,000 years, every single one of them had two things right before the end. They had celebrity chefs and...
So we're on track.
They had celebrity chefs and they had inclusivity. Inclusivity is what you do towards the end to try and pacify the people that you've completely fucked over, you know. So they had, like we were talking, like we mentioned Nero back at the start, you know, Claudius, Caligula, all those insane bastards, all the Trumps of Rome. I tell you, they had Gaulish senators. They had consuls in that era that were from Gaul. So, you know, they included the natives at the highest level of government and, you know, in the arts and culture and literature and merchant class and everything else. So the more inclusive an empire becomes towards the end, well, you know, it's a sign that it's coming towards the end. So I have a different, yeah, I'm a fan of inclusion, but only because it's one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. Yeah, so yeah, please do, but include us all. You know, wheel out any fella and give him a ghostwriter and pop his book on your shelf. Speaking of books on shelves, I'm colorblind, so I can't actually see the OCD sort of thing that you got going on there. So we're good, no matter what anyone says. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you, Tyson. Bri, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tyson. Something I just need to do a little announcement before we all go for the evening, which is to tell everyone watching what we're doing for the next book club. So for anyone interested in joining us next month, we will be speaking with Liz Allen about her new book, The Future of Us. Liz Allen is a demographer. So she talks about how tracing connections between a population's past and present can help demographers foresee its future. And I'm really looking forward to asking Liz about migration in particular. She's been doing this research-led work for a very long time. And I also just want to quickly mention that we have a very special event. I'll be being joined live from Pakistan by Sanam Maher, who is a journalist and author, to talk about her book, A Woman Like Her, The Short Life of Kandil Balok. Kandil was sort of, I suppose, described as the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan, and she was murdered. And Sanam is an investigative journalist who has written a book delving into the not just the event, but of course the issues that it reveals about not just Pakistan, but I think society more broadly. So those two events are coming up this month, and the event links are already live on the State Library's website, so you can find them on the What's On section. And that's it from us, and I encourage everyone at home to, as we would if we were in person, give Tyson Yunkaporta, the author of Sand Talk, a huge round of applause to thank him for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Tyson. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.